They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But let me tell you, when you're standing at the edge of losing everything, your family, your legacy, your dignity, you can't afford to wait. I didn't, and it cost me more than I could ever explain. It was the slap heard around the world, and it changed everything. Gilead Ridge wasn't just a farm to me. It was a piece of my soul, a reflection of every dream Eleanor and I ever shared. It was a promise we made to each other the moment we decided to plant the first vine, the first seed of what would grow into the life we built together. Every row of grapevines, every corner of the land, held memories that no amount of money could replace. This wasn't just soil. It was the foundation of our family. I've always been the quiet type, calm, steady, deliberate. I've spent my life cultivating the land, and I thought that was all I'd ever need. But that all changed the day I stood at the edge of Gilead Ridge, watching my daughter, Grace, marry a man I should have known better than to trust. I remember the exact moment I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't during the wedding or the rehearsal dinner or even the countless conversations we had leading up to it. It was that night, as I stood alone in the vineyard with the scent of damp earth and the distant chirping of crickets filling the silence. The night felt like a pause in time, a moment to reflect, to remember Eleanor. She had always been the stronger one, practical, wise, and always one step ahead. She saw things I didn't. She knew how to read people, and she'd seen something in Grace's new husband, Rick, that I missed. I thought maybe it was just a father's worry, but now I know I should have listened to her. Rick wasn't like the other men I had worked with over the years. He was driven, yes, but not by passion or dedication to the land. He was driven by something darker, something I couldn't quite place. The moment I saw him eyeing the vineyard, talking about development and how we could make this place a gold mine, something inside me shifted. I thought I could trust Grace. She was my little girl, after all. But seeing the way she lit up when she was with him, hearing her talk about their future together, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing her. Not just to Rick, but to the idea of something more, something bigger, something far removed from the humble, grounded life Eleanor and I had built here. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to believe that Rick could be a good man, that he could understand what this land meant to me, to my family. I wanted to believe that Grace could see beyond the glamour of his promises. But the tension started to creep in. It was in the way Rick talked about the vineyard, how it could be more than just a farm. He said it could be a destination, an investment. He didn't understand that for me, it was more than that. It was everything. The farm wasn't just land. It was the promise I made to Eleanor, the promise to protect this place no matter what. And I had no intention of letting it slip away. But Rick had his eyes on it, and that's when everything started to go downhill. There's a saying that blood is thicker than water. But let me tell you, when the blood starts mixing with greed, it's a whole different story. That's what I started to realize as I watched Rick slip into our lives, weaving his way into every corner of Grace's world. It didn't happen overnight. No, it was slow, methodical. Just like everything else he did, everything he said. And by the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late. Grace, my little girl, was always the light of our lives. She grew up running barefoot in the vineyard, chasing the sun from one corner of the farm to the other, her laughter echoing through the rows of grapes. Eleanor and I, we spent countless hours teaching her about the land. It was our family's tradition, our legacy. I never once imagined that one day someone would come along and try to convince her to trade that legacy for a future of luxury and ease. The trouble began long before the wedding. It was in the small things, the comments Rick made when we'd gather for dinner, the way he'd talk about upgrading the farm, about unlocking its potential. I brushed it off at first, after all. Rick was an ambitious man, and ambition isn't a crime. But then came the comments about the resort industry, the untapped market, and that's when I began to feel the first prickling of unease. He'd sit across from me at the table, his eyes scanning the land outside, as if he was already calculating how much money could be made from it. He'd say things like, "With a little investment, we could double the value of this place, Thomas. You wouldn't have to worry about anything ever again. Just think about it. Resort amenities, luxury estates, vineyards for wine tours, golf courses." And every time he said it, I could see Grace's eyes light up, not with the joy of understanding the value of the land, but with the dream of a life far removed from the dirt and sweat of farming. It wasn't that Grace didn't love the vineyard. She did. I could see that in the way she smiled when she worked beside me, the way her hands moved over the soil like they were part of the earth itself. But there was something about Rick's vision for her that had started to cloud her judgment. He painted a picture of a life of ease, a life of wealth, and in that picture the farm was just another commodity. I didn't know how to fight that. How do you fight something so seductive, so promising? It wasn't long before I realized I wasn't just up against Rick. I was up against something far deeper, the lure of wealth, the promise of a future that seemed too good to resist. I saw it in Grace's eyes, the way she would talk about their future together, about moving to the city, building something bigger than what we had here. It was like she couldn't see it, the value of what we had. The vineyard wasn't just land. It was the essence of everything we had built, everything Eleanor and I had worked for, but it wasn't just the land. The more I watched Grace and Rick together, the more I felt like I was losing her piece by piece. The small gestures, the way she would choose him over me, over us, it stung. At first I told myself I was just being an old man, afraid of change. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about change. It was about the loss of everything Eleanor and I had worked for. The erasure of our history in favor of something shallow, something that didn't understand the value of hard work and sacrifice. I tried to talk to Grace. I did. But every time I brought it up, she'd dismiss it. She'd tell me, "Dad, this is just a dream. Rick's just trying to make things better for us." And in her voice, I could hear it. The blind trust in him, the faith that what he was saying was true. She was caught up in it, in the vision of a life that was so far removed from the reality of what we had here. And it broke my heart, because I knew what she didn't. I knew the cost of that kind of life. I knew the price of selling out for money, for status. I had seen it in other families, the way they lost themselves in the pursuit of wealth, the way they abandoned everything that mattered for something that could never satisfy. I kept quiet, though. I didn't want to fight with my daughter. I didn't want to make her choose between me and Rick, between the farm and the dream. But I couldn't help it. The more I watched Rick spin his web around her, the more I knew something had to be done. I couldn't just stand by and watch him take everything Eleanor and I had worked for. It was in that silence, that slow realization that I had no choice, that the anger began to build in me. Not the hot, fiery rage that comes when you're caught in the heat of the moment. No, this was a cold, calculating anger. The kind of anger that settles in your bones and doesn't let go. And it wasn't just anger at Rick, it was anger at myself, for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting Grace from this man, from his empty promises. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to act yet, not until I saw Rick's true nature. Not until I had the proof, and that's when I started to gather the pieces, the evidence that would tear his mask off and expose him for who he really was. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a time for us all to come together, to celebrate Grace and Rick's union, the kind of peaceful evening where the families mingle, where toasts are made, and everyone tries their best to get along. But when I walked into that room, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the clinking glasses, the dimmed lights, or even the beautiful lake view that set my nerves on edge. It was Rick. He was already at the head of the table, talking animatedly with the guests, his hands moving in exaggerated gestures as he spoke of the big plans he had for the future. And it wasn't the kind of future I had imagined for Grace. The guests all seemed enamored by his words, hanging on to every syllable. I watched from my seat, my glass of water untouched, feeling like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding. This wasn't just a dinner, it was Rick's stage, and he was playing the part of the charming, successful businessman who had all the answers. I felt my jaw tighten as he continued, oblivious to the ripple of unease spreading across my chest. Imagine, Rick said, a sprawling estate here, with luxury resorts, spas, and of course, the Vineyard as the centerpiece. It's got all the potential in the world, Sam. And for Grace, well, we can give her the world, make her dreams come true. He paused and looked around the table, as if waiting for applause. The guests murmured in approval, not realizing the weight of the words they were endorsing. My daughter Grace sat beside him, glowing with pride as she nodded along to his every word. I watched her face light up, and I could see it in her eyes. The same gleam she had when she was a little girl, excited by whatever promise Rick had whispered to her. I wanted to shake her, tell her that this wasn't the future we had built, that she was trading in something real for something hollow. But all I could do was sit there, watching as the man I had come to distrust spun his vision for the future. It wasn't the first time Rick had mentioned his plans for Gilead Ridge, but this time it was different. This time the air in the room felt heavier, more charged. There was a sharpness to his tone that I hadn't noticed before, something calculated, something cold beneath the charm. He turned to me as if to gauge my reaction. "Sam, you must understand," he continued. "This is about securing the future. Gilead Ridge, with all its potential, could be the cornerstone of something bigger than you and Eleanor ever imagined. Don't you want to see it thrive? To see it grow beyond just a farm?" I held my breath, my mind racing as I looked at him, his eager face waiting for me to give in, to agree. He didn't see it, not the way Eleanor and I had. The Vineyard wasn't just a piece of land. It was the culmination of our lives, the blood, sweat, and tears that we had poured into it. And here he was, talking about it as though it were some business deal, an investment to be flipped. I could feel the sting of the words rising in my throat, but I held back. Grace was sitting there, her hand resting on Rick's, her eyes filled with hope and trust. It was clear she couldn't see it, not yet. She couldn't see the man behind the mask, the one who would stop at nothing to take what he wanted. "Rick," I said quietly, not wanting to raise my voice in front of Grace, "I know you think this is all for the best, but this land, this farm, is not just an asset. It's part of our soul. It's Eleanor's legacy." The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. They tasted bitter, like the truth I'd been avoiding for too long. But it was the truth. Gilead Ridge was more than just soil. It was a living, breathing piece of history, a story of love and loss, of perseverance and promise. And Rick had no right to turn it into something he could profit from. Rick's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. His eyes flickered with something dark, something I had seen before, manipulation disguised as charm. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering as if to be more intimate, more persuasive. "Sam," he said softly, "I'm not asking you to give up your farm. I'm asking you to think about Grace's future. Don't you want her to have the best? To live in a world of opportunity, not just work the land her whole life?" I could feel the pressure mounting in my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight of the situation, the manipulation that hung in the air like a thick fog. Rick wasn't just talking about the Vineyard, he was talking about my daughter's future, about my place in her life, about the control he wanted over everything. I took a slow breath, my mind running in circles, trying to find a way to explain what he couldn't understand. "This isn't about opportunity, Rick. This is about something deeper, something you wouldn't understand. This farm, this vineyard, it's about family. It's about legacy. You can't just build a legacy with a blueprint and a bank loan." But Rick wasn't listening. He never had. I could see it in the way his eyes darted between me and Grace, the way he moved to change the subject, to push his vision forward. He wasn't trying to build something for Grace. He was trying to take it all for himself. And the worst part? Grace couldn't see it. She still believed in him. She still believed in his promises of a bright, shiny future. The dinner ended uneventfully, with Rick carrying on as if nothing had happened. The guests clapped, Grace smiled, and I sat in silence, feeling the walls close in around me. But as I walked out into the night, The cold air hitting my face, I knew something had shifted. Rick hadn't just challenged me. He had challenged everything Eleanor and I had ever worked for. And I wasn't going to let him win. It was no longer just about the farm. It was about my family's future, my daughter's future, and the legacy that was being threatened. And no matter how much Rick tried to charm, manipulate, and sweet-talk his way into my life, I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The night after the rehearsal dinner, I couldn't sleep. The day had worn me thin, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Grace, Rick, the Vineyard, the promises I made to Eleanor. As I lay in bed, my mind kept circling back to the conversation I'd had with Rick, the smooth way he spoke about the Vineyard, about our family's legacy. The more I thought about it, the more my blood began to boil. I could feel it rising within me, a slow burn that wasn't ready to erupt. But it was there, deep in my chest. I rose from the bed. The house, eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the wooden floorboards under my feet. I could still hear Rick's voice in my head, his words about development and profit echoing in the empty spaces of our home. I needed air. I needed to clear my head. The Vineyard, I knew, was where I would find some semblance of peace. I grabbed my jacket and walked out into the night, the cool autumn air biting at my skin. The stars were scattered across the sky, their quiet brilliance a sharp contrast to the turmoil swirling inside me. The Vineyard stretched out before me, silent and still, its rows of vines shrouded in shadows, their twisted forms resembling sentinels standing watch over this land that had been my life's work. I walked slowly, my boots crunching against the gravel path, my thoughts running faster than my feet could carry me. I had always believed that the land spoke to those who were willing to listen. Eleanor and I had built this farm together, and it had always been our sanctuary. But now it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Threatened by the man who had wed my daughter, I stopped at the old oak tree, the one Eleanor and I had planted years ago, just off the vineyard's edge. It had weathered many storms, its gnarled branches heavy with the years of its existence. The tree seemed to stand in silent defiance, much like me. As I stood there, my hand resting against its rough bark, I could almost feel Eleanor's presence beside me. I whispered her name under my breath, as if to summon her strength, her wisdom. She had always been the practical one, the one who could see through the fog of ambition and greed. I could almost hear her voice, clear in my mind, warning me that this day would come. She had always known. She'd always seen through the surface. That's when it hit me. Eleanor had left me something for this very moment, something that could help me protect this place, protect our legacy. I turned and walked back to the house with purpose. I made my way to the small office tucked in the back corner of the house, the place where Eleanor had kept all of her important documents, contracts, deeds, legal papers. It was more than just a desk to her. It was her fortress. The place where she managed everything, kept track of every detail, every part of the business. I opened the drawer, pulling out a worn leather box. It was simple, nothing ornate, but it carried a weight that I could feel in the pit of my stomach. I had seen it before many times, but never once had I opened it. It was Eleanor's final gift, something she had left for me when she passed, something I hadn't fully understood until now. I hesitated for only a moment, my hand shaking slightly, before I opened it. Inside was a collection of papers, neatly stacked, along with a small USB drive. But it wasn't just paperwork. There was something more, a letter handwritten in Eleanor's elegant script. The letter was short, but it carried a heavy message. Sam, if you're reading this, then you know things are changing. You know what's coming. You've always been the quiet one. The one who believed in the goodness of people, in the idea that things would work themselves out. But sometimes, Sam, things don't work out the way we want them to. And sometimes you need to take action. This farm, this vineyard, is more than just land. It's more than grapes and wine. It's our family's legacy. And if anyone tries to take that from you, if anyone tries to tear it down and make it into something it's not, I want you to do whatever it takes to protect it. Inside this box, you'll find everything you need. The evidence you'll need to make sure that Rick doesn't take everything we've worked for. I trust you, Sam. Don't let him win. Don't let him turn our life's work into a commodity. With all my love, Eleanor. I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hands, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Eleanor had known. She had known this would happen, and she had prepared me for it. Inside the box, along with the letter, were more documents. Bank statements, contracts, even receipts from the loans Rick had asked us for over the years. Eleanor had kept meticulous records, each one marking the slow unraveling of Rick's finances, his mounting debts, and his growing desperation. There was something else too, a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop, the screen flickering to life. The files that appeared were not just records of financial transactions. They were more damning than that. They were proof of Rick's manipulation, his schemes to take over the Vineyard, to force me out of the picture. Eleanor had always been a step ahead. She had seen through Rick's charade before I had. She had known that one day I would need this evidence to protect what we had built. As I scrolled through the documents, the anger that had simmered inside me began to boil over. I had no choice now. I had to fight. This wasn't just about the farm. It was about my family's honor, my daughter's future, and the legacy Eleanor and I had worked so hard to build. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to wait any longer. The morning of the wedding arrived with the usual bustle and flurry of activity. I could hear the laughter and chatter downstairs as Grace and her bridesmaids prepared, but all I could think about was what had happened the night before. My mind replayed Rick's words, his calm, rehearsed tone, as he painted his vision for the Vineyard. He made it sound so simple, so easy to turn this place into a profitable resort. But I knew better. This wasn't just a transaction to me. This was my life, my history, my promise to Eleanor. And no amount of fancy words or business jargon was going to change that. As I stood in front of the mirror, fumbling with my bow tie, I tried to push the thoughts out of my head. I wasn't supposed to be the one causing a scene. Today was supposed to be about Grace. She was radiant, the happiest I'd ever seen her. How could I ruin that? But even as I stood there in my tuxedo, my reflection staring back at me with a mixture of pride and uncertainty, I knew what was coming. I tried to ignore it, to push it out of my mind, but now there was no way around it. Rick wasn't going to let this go. He wanted what he wanted, and I was standing in his way. That's when the knock came at the door. I hadn't expected it, not yet. I thought I still had time, a few more hours before the ceremony, before the reception. But there he was, standing in the doorway with that smug, self-assured smile plastered across his face. Rick had come to deliver his final offer, the one he'd been waiting to make ever since the rehearsal dinner. He wasn't holding a gift, though, no. This time he was holding a leather portfolio, sleek and professional, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He entered the room without waiting for permission, and for a moment I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Sam," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "I've got something for you." I didn't respond, just stood there staring at him. I couldn't help but notice how perfect he looked in his tuxedo, the image of a man who had everything together. The world seemed to revolve around him, and I was just a small part of it. He laid the portfolio down on the dresser, his fingers brushing the smooth leather like it was the most precious thing in the world. "This is for you, for us," he said, turning to me with a look of expectation in his eyes. "We're going to make this work, Sam, for Grace, for the future." He opened the portfolio slowly, almost ceremoniously, as though this moment were of the utmost importance. Inside, there were plans, detailed blueprints for the resort, the hotel, the luxurious amenities he wanted to build on the farm. Everything was laid out as if it were already decided. He spoke about it as if it were inevitable, like I had no say in the matter. "Look at these designs," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "I've already talked to contractors, and I've got investors lined up. All we need is your signature, Sam. We can turn this place into something incredible." The vineyard, the property, the land, it'll all be worth millions. You'll be set for life. Grace will have the world at her feet. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't trust myself to speak. How could he look at this land and see nothing but dollar signs? How could he not understand what it meant? Finally, I found my voice. I told you, Rick, this isn't just land. This is everything. This is our history. It's not something to be sold off to the highest bidder. His smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing, as if he were sizing me up. Sam, he said, his voice dropping slightly, I understand this is hard for you, but you've got to think about Grace. She deserves more than this farm. She deserves a life of comfort, of luxury. You're not getting any younger, and this place, this farm, it's too much for you. You don't want to burden her with it, do you? His words felt like a slap, but I couldn't show it. Not yet. I held my ground, my fists clenched by my sides. Grace doesn't need luxury, I said firmly. What she needs is the truth. She needs to know what this place really is. This isn't about wealth. This is about what's real. This is about legacy. Rick leaned in slightly, his expression hardening. Sam, let's not do this now. Not today. You've worked hard, I get it. But this is bigger than you. This is bigger than me. This is for Grace. I took a step back, my mind racing, heart pounding in my chest. It felt like the room was closing in on me. The pressure was suffocating. This was it. He wasn't going to back down, and neither was I. I won't sign it, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not giving up what we've built. You don't get to take this from me. Rick's smile slipped completely. The mask of charm faded, and I saw something darker in his eyes, something dangerous. He straightened up, his posture rigid, his voice colder than before. We'll see about that, Sam. You may think you're in control here, but you're not. Not anymore, I didn't flinch. I said no, Rick, and that's final. The silence between us was thick, heavy. It was as if the whole world had stopped just for a moment. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and steady, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Rick turned on his heel, his hand sliding into his pocket as he walked toward the door. We'll talk after the ceremony, he said over his shoulder, his voice dripping with forced civility. I'll give you some time to think about it. But you'll change your mind, Sam. You'll see it's the only way forward. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched him leave the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click. As I stood there, my hands trembling slightly, I knew it wasn't over. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. This was about control. This was about my family's future, and I wasn't going to let Rick take it from me. The wedding ceremony was everything I had hoped it would be for Grace. Beautiful, elegant, a moment that she would carry with her forever. But as I stood at the back of the church, watching her walk down the aisle with her face glowing and her hand tightly held by Rick, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She was happy, I could see that, and yet my gut churned with a sense of dread. This wasn't just a marriage. This was the beginning of something else, something I wasn't ready for. The church was filled with guests, friends, family, people from the community who had known Grace since she was a child. The sun filtered in through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and polished wood, but it felt suffocating to me, like the walls were closing in. I couldn't focus on anything but Rick and the promises he'd made, the ones he made to Grace, the ones I couldn't ignore. I sat through the ceremony, my thoughts miles away. My eyes stayed fixed on Grace, but my mind was elsewhere, racing with thoughts of the vineyard, of what was slipping away. It was clear to me now, Rick wasn't just here to marry my daughter. He was here to take Gilead Ridge, to take everything we had worked for, and turn it into something he could sell, something he could profit from. As the ceremony came to an end, and the newlyweds walked down the aisle together, the applause rang in my ears like a distant sound. I stood there, clapping along with the others, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being lost. Grace was no longer the young girl I'd raised, running through the vineyard in the summer heat. She was someone else now, someone who was willing to trade everything for a future that wasn't hers to give away. The reception was at the grand estate Rick's family had rented for the evening. A lavish affair filled with expensive food and sparkling champagne. I watched as Grace and Rick made their rounds, greeting guests, laughing, posing for pictures. They looked so perfect together, so in love. But to me, it was all a facade, a perfect image crafted to hide the truth of what was really happening. I tried to stay out of the spotlight, quietly nursing my drink at the back of the room. But as the evening wore on, the weight of the situation began to settle on me more heavily. It wasn't just the vineyard anymore. It was Grace, my daughter, who was slipping away into a world where she was no longer mine to protect. That's when Rick made his move. The reception had settled into a quiet lull. People were mingling, enjoying the music and chatting with one another. The air was warm, the soft glow of candlelight flickering on the tables. I'd almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. But then, Rick stepped up to the microphone, a smug smile on his face as he looked out over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice loud and confident, "I'd like to thank you all for being here to celebrate this special day. But most of all, I want to thank my beautiful wife, Grace. Together, we are going to build a future. A future not just for us, but for everyone here. A future that includes something I've always believed in, creating something bigger than ourselves." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as Rick continued, his words growing more self-assured. "You see," he said, "we don't just have Gilead Ridge to thank for this future. We have the people who've supported us, who've given us the strength to make this dream a reality. But it's not just about this beautiful farm. It's about turning Gilead Ridge into something more, a destination, a place for all of us to enjoy, for generations to come." His eyes flicked toward me, and I knew what was coming. I knew it was only a matter of time before he would demand what he felt was his. Rick's smile turned a little too wide, a little too smug. "And speaking of legacy," he said, "I'd like to ask Sam, my father-in-law, to join me up here for a moment." The room went silent for a moment as I stood from my seat, my legs heavy with dread. I walked toward him slowly, my mind racing, heart pounding, unsure of what this man was about to do. The eyes of the room followed me, the whispers filling the air. Grace was standing beside Rick, her eyes bright with anticipation. I reached the front and Rick turned toward me, his expression a mask of feigned sincerity. "Sam," he said, his voice thick with false warmth, "I know this is a big day for you too, for all of us. But I think it's time we take the next step. It's time to give Grace and me the future we deserve. We've got plans, you see, big plans for Gilead Ridge." I could feel the anger rising within me, but I kept my composure, my voice steady. "Rick, I've told you before. This land, this vineyard, it's not for sale. Not now, not ever," he ignored me, continuing his speech, his voice growing louder. "Sam, this place is just the beginning. You've worked hard and I respect that. But I'm asking you now for Grace, for our future, to hand over the keys to the vineyard. I want to make sure the next generation has something truly special." The words stung, and I could feel my blood run cold. There was no negotiation in his tone, no respect for the years of hard work Eleanor and I had put in. Just a demand. Before I could speak, before I could even move, Rick reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He held them out toward me with a practiced smile. "Here, Sam, it's time. Hand them over. We can make this official." And that was it. In that moment, something broke inside me. It wasn't just the anger or the betrayal. It was the final realization that everything I had worked for, everything I had promised Eleanor, was being taken from me in front of everyone, without thinking. I slapped him. The sound of it rang out through the room, sharp and loud, like a gunshot breaking the silence. The crowd gasped in unison. I could see the shock in Grace's eyes, the horror. I didn't care. I couldn't care. Rick stood there, stunned, his face turning red with fury. For a moment, neither of us moved. And then he did what I knew he would. He turned away, shaking his head, a low growl of frustration escaping his lips. He wasn't going to back down. And neither was I. The slap still rang in my ears, even as the room went silent. Grace's face was a mixture of shock and confusion. I could see it in her eyes, the hurt, the disbelief. She didn't understand. She couldn't. Not yet. Rick stood there for a moment, frozen in disbelief, his hand still raised where mine had struck him. The room was a blur of whispered gasps and awkward glances. I didn't care. The only thing I could hear in that moment was the pounding of my own heart, the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out the noise of the guests who were surely staring at me, judging me. But all I could focus on was the man standing in front of me, my son-in-law, the man who had come into my life with smiles and charm, only to show his true colors when the time came. Rick's jaw clenched as he wiped his cheek with the back of his hand, his eyes narrowing in anger. He didn't say a word, but the look he gave me spoke volumes. I had crossed a line, and he was going to make me regret it. I could see it in his eyes, the same cold determination that had driven him to push this far. He didn't care about Grace, about our family, about the Vineyard. He cared about power, about control, and now he saw me as a threat. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he wouldn't stop until he had everything he wanted. But the moment passed. The silence stretched on, and I could feel the weight of the room pressing in on me. Then slowly, Rick turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the hall. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had already made his point. Grace stood frozen for a moment longer, her eyes locked on me as if waiting for an explanation. But what could I say? How could I explain what was happening when I was still trying to make sense of it myself? I took a deep breath and turned to leave the reception hall. I didn't want to face her right now. I needed space, time to think, to gather my thoughts. I couldn't do this in front of everyone. I couldn't let Rick win by letting my emotions take over. This wasn't about a slap anymore. It was about protecting what was mine, what was ours. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the chill of the evening biting at my skin. The vineyard stretched out before me, the rows of vines swaying gently in the breeze. I took a deep breath, the familiar smell of the earth grounding me. The land had always been my solace, my refuge, and tonight I needed it more than ever. I walked down the familiar path toward the old oak tree, the one Eleanor and I had planted all those years ago. It had weathered storms, droughts, and hardships, just like us. I reached out to touch its gnarled bark, feeling its rough texture beneath my fingers. In that moment, something clicked. Eleanor had always been the practical one, the one who planned ahead, who knew when to fight and when to wait. She had left me everything I needed to protect this place: documents, receipts, contracts, the proof of Rick's manipulations, his lies, his debts. She had seen this coming. And now it was my turn to take action. I couldn't just sit back and let Rick bulldoze his way through everything I had worked for. I had to fight back. But this time, it wouldn't be with rage or violence. It would be with something far stronger: strategy. I returned to the house, to the office where Eleanor had kept everything. I knew what I had to do. I'd already called David, the lawyer Eleanor had trusted for years. I would need him now more than ever. He was sharp, reliable, and most importantly, he had the resources to take Rick down. I didn't care about the legal battle ahead. I would fight this to the end. I sat at Eleanor's desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I began drafting the first of many letters. I would contact Tanaka Holdings, the company that had been involved in the Vineyard's early partnerships, the one that Eleanor had made sure was involved in every legal step. They wouldn't stand for Rick's deception either. The legal documents, the evidence Eleanor had gathered, this was my weapon, and I wasn't going to let Rick get away with it. Not after everything Eleanor and I had built. The minutes turned into hours, and the fire of determination began to burn hotter within me. This was no longer about saving a farm. This was about justice. It was about standing up for my family, my daughter, and the future Eleanor and I had envisioned. I took the evidence I had, every financial document, every piece of correspondence, and every bit of proof of Rick's manipulations, and made my plan. This wasn't just going to be a legal battle. It was going to be a statement that no one could walk into our lives, our legacy, and tear it apart for their own selfish gain. Rick had underestimated me. He had underestimated the lengths I would go to protect what mattered most. And now he would see what happens when you try to take something that doesn't belong to you. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was David. "Sam," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I've reviewed everything. We've got a case here. A strong one. It's time to make sure Rick understands that we don't back down." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the coming battle settle over me. But this time it wasn't just about me. It was about everything Eleanor and I had worked for, everything we had dreamed of. And I would see it through no matter the cost. As I stood in the office, looking out over the darkened vineyard, I knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The days that followed felt like an eternity. I couldn't get the image of Grace's face out of my mind. The confusion, the hurt, the disbelief. She hadn't understood why I did what I did. How could she? All she saw was her father standing in front of her, humiliated and angry, lashing out at the man she had chosen. She didn't see the years of hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears Eleanor and I had poured into Gilead Ridge. She didn't see the threat Rick posed, the quiet manipulation that had been building beneath the surface for months, if not years, but I couldn't worry about that now. What mattered was that I had made a stand, and I wasn't going to back down. David, my lawyer, was quick to act. Within a week, we had sent formal notices to Rick and his legal team, detailing the evidence of his fraudulent financial dealings, the false promises he had made, and the manipulations he had used to try to gain control of the vineyard. It wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about justice, about making sure Rick knew that he couldn't just walk into our lives, take what he wanted, and leave destruction in his wake. The legal battle that followed was swift. Tanaka Holdings, the company Eleanor had wisely involved in our business dealings years ago, sided with me without hesitation. Their legal team, a group of sharp, experienced attorneys, worked quickly to push Rick's scheme into the light. His financial mismanagement, his shady deals, and his attempt to manipulate Grace into selling the vineyard, all of it came to light in a series of legal filings and court hearings. And the more Rick tried to deny, the more the truth came out. The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor had left nothing to chance. The USB drive, the financial records, the correspondence with Rick, it all painted the picture of a man desperate for control, willing to tear apart a family to satisfy his greed. The more I watched the court proceedings unfold, the more I felt a quiet sense of relief. This wasn't just about protecting the vineyard anymore. This was about protecting the integrity of what Eleanor and I had built. It was about ensuring that Grace, no matter what, would one day understand the value of the legacy we had fought for. But it wasn't easy. The legal battle was long and draining. There were moments when I thought I couldn't keep going, moments when I wondered if it was worth it. But then I would think of Eleanor, of the promise I had made to her, and I knew there was no turning back. The day the verdict came was a day I'll never forget. It was a Wednesday, cloudy with a chill in the air. I sat in the courtroom, waiting for the judge to deliver the final ruling. Grace was sitting beside me, her eyes downcast, her expression unreadable. I could tell she was torn. She still didn't fully understand the depths of Rick's deception, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. She loved him, of that much I was certain. But there was also a part of her that could sense the wrongness of it all. When the judge finally spoke, it felt like the world had stopped. The words were clear, final, and to the point. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, and the financial misconduct proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the ownership of Gilead Ridge remains with Samuel Hale. Richard West is hereby prohibited from making any claims to the property and is ordered to settle all outstanding debts. I could barely breathe as the words echoed in the room. Victory, it wasn't just a win for me, it was a win for everything Eleanor and I had fought for. It was a win for the family legacy, for the vineyard that had been our life's work, but as the courtroom buzzed with the sound of people gathering their things, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? Grace's eyes were full of hurt, her gaze distant, as if she was seeing me for the first time in a way she hadn't before. She was disappointed, I could tell. She couldn't fully understand why I had done what I did, and part of me knew that it would take time for her to see things clearly. Rick, on the other hand, was livid. His face was ashen, his body tense with fury as the court officers informed him of the decision. He stormed out of the courtroom, his fists clenched, muttering curses under his breath. I could hear his anger echoing in the halls as he disappeared through the door. I knew he would never let this go. He wasn't the type to walk away quietly, but that didn't matter. The truth had been revealed, and it wasn't going to be easy for him to get away with his deceit. Later that evening, after the dust had settled, I sat in the vineyard once again, staring out at the land that had been the center of everything. The sun had set, and the vineyard was bathed in a soft golden glow. The vines, silhouetted against the sky, stood as silent witnesses to everything that had transpired. Grace joined me in the silence, sitting beside me on the old wooden bench that overlooked the fields. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. It hurt to see her this way, hurt to know that I had driven a wedge between us. But I also knew that this wasn't over, not yet. "I don't understand, Dad," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Why did you do it? Why couldn't you just let him help us?" "Let him help me." I looked at her, the pain in her voice cutting through me. "I know it's hard to understand, Grace, but sometimes, when you love something, when you've worked for something for your whole life, you can't just let someone come in and take it." This vineyard wasn't just about growing grapes. It was about building a future, a legacy that belonged to your mother and me. And I couldn't let that be stolen. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you for what you did, but I understand now. I think I do. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. Grace would need time to heal, to process everything that had happened. But I had done what I had to do, and in the end, it was the right thing. As the stars began to appear in the sky above, I sat there in silence with Grace, both of us looking out at the land that would continue on, its roots deep in the soil, its future uncertain but secure. Gilead Ridge was ours again, and this time no one would take it from us. Not ever.